Vanessa Hart had seen her son shut down before. It wasn't new. For months, Owen had made an art of it. The blank stare, the one-word answers, the way he could sit in the same room as her and feel like he was somewhere else entirely. She told herself it was a phase. She told herself he was still adjusting. She told herself a lot of things. The morning she brought him to the office, she had done everything right. She asked if he was hungry. She pointed to the couch by the window and told him she would only be an hour. She even touched his shoulder before she walked into the conference room, and he let her, which, lately, felt like the closest thing to a win. She was in that meeting for 90 minutes. When she pushed open the glass door and stepped back into the hallway, she expected to find Owen exactly where she had left him. Headphones in, eyes down, waiting for the whole thing to be over. Instead, she stopped. Halfway down the corridor, seated on the floor beside a maintenance cart, was her son, and next to him, a man in a gray uniform she recognized from the building's cleaning crew. A black man, probably in his late 30s, with a quiet face and careful hands. Owen was talking, not answering, not responding. Talking, leaning slightly forward, gesturing at something the man was holding, the corner of his mouth lifted in an expression Vanessa hadn't seen in so long she had almost forgotten what it looked like on him. He looked like a kid who had finally found somewhere to breathe. Vanessa stood there, her folder pressed to her chest, and felt something she wasn't prepared for. Not relief, not confusion, but the hollow ache of a mother realizing a stranger had reached the place she couldn't. If stories like this one stay with you, subscribe to the channel. We tell more of them every week. Now let's go back to the beginning. Marcus Reed was not the kind of man people noticed. That wasn't a complaint, it was simply the shape of his life. He moved through spaces quietly, replacing trash liners before anyone saw they were full, mopping spills before anyone slipped, buffing the lobby floor in the early hours when the building still belonged to the cleaning crew and the security guards and nobody else. He did his job with a precision that came not from pride in the work itself, but from the habit of a man who had learned, a long time ago, that the only things worth doing were worth doing carefully. He was 37. He had been doing this particular job for 4 years, since Nia was 6 and he needed something with steady hours and predictable shifts. The Callaway Group's downtown headquarters wasn't glamorous work, but the schedule was reliable. The building manager left him alone, and the commute was short enough that he could drop Nia at school and still clock in by 8. Most people in the building didn't know his name. A few of the longer-tenured employees nodded when he passed. The receptionist on the 14th floor always said good morning, and he appreciated that more than he ever mentioned. But beyond that, Marcus existed in that invisibility that comes with the uniform, the cart, the mop, the kind that isn't hostile, just automatic. People looked through him the way they looked through windows, aware of the glass, focused on what was beyond it. What they didn't see, what they had no reason to see, was everything the job contained. The man behind the gray uniform had spent the last 7 years raising a daughter alone. His wife Diane had died of a brain aneurysm when Nia was 3 years old. There was no warning. There was no time. One morning she was making coffee and telling him she thought they should repaint the bathroom, and 3 days later she was gone. Marcus had stood at her graveside with a toddler on his hip and understood, with a clarity that felt like something breaking inside his chest, that there was no one else. Just him. Just Nia. He didn't have the luxury of falling apart, so he didn't. He learned to braid hair from YouTube videos. He learned which nightmares needed a glass of water and which ones needed him to lie down on the floor beside her bed until she fell back asleep. He learned the difference between the silence that meant she was fine and the silence that meant something was wrong. He learned to read her the way only a parent who has had to be everything can learn to read a child. Not by instinct, but by years of paying attention. That was what people couldn't see when they looked at him. The education. Vanessa Hart could walk into any room and own it within 30 seconds. She had built that skill deliberately, the way she built everything, through discipline, repetition, and the kind of focused ambition that left very little room for anything else. At 41, she ran the Callaway Group with a reputation for being precise, decisive, and nearly impossible to rattle. Her board respected her. Her competitors watched her carefully. Her assistant had once described her affectionately as the most organized human being on Earth. What her assistant didn't know, what almost no one in that building knew, was how much of that precision was armor. The divorce had finalized 2 years ago. Owen was 8 when it happened, old enough to understand something had broken, young enough that he didn't have the words for what he'd lost. Vanessa had handled the logistics with characteristic efficiency. New school, new therapist, new routine. She gave Owen stability because stability was what she knew how to give. She made sure he had everything he needed. What she hadn't accounted for, what kept her awake on the nights she allowed herself to stop working, was the growing silence between them. Owen had always been a quiet child, but this was different. This was a withdrawal. He answered her questions, followed the household rules, caused no trouble at school. But there was a distance in his eyes that she couldn't cross, a door she kept knocking on that never quite opened. She had taken him to therapy. She had cleared her schedule on weekends. She had read books about children and grief and emotional development until the words blurred together. None of it had closed that gap. She didn't understand yet that the gap wasn't something she could close by working harder at it. The morning it happened, Owen had been sitting outside Conference Room B for 40 minutes with his backpack on his lap and his eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Vanessa had done her usual preparations. She had brought his water bottle. She had reminded him twice that she wouldn't be long. She had set him up in the waiting area just outside the glass-walled room with a clear sight line to where she'd be sitting, as if proximity could substitute for presence. Owen had nodded without looking at her, pulled his knees to his chest, and settled into the stillness that had become his default. He waited until the conference room door clicked shut. Then he stood up, left his backpack on the chair, and started walking. He didn't have a destination. He moved the way children move when they're restless but too well-behaved to cause a scene. Slowly, close to the walls, pausing to look at things that adults would walk past without registering. A framed print near the elevator. A water fountain with an out-of-order sign that had clearly been there for months. A rubber doorstop shaped like a wedge that someone had kicked slightly crooked. He turned the corner into the maintenance corridor and stopped. A man was there, crouched beside a large cart loaded with cleaning supplies, retying a trash liner that had slipped from its bracket. He worked with the focused calm of someone who did this 50 times a day and had stopped thinking about it. Hanging from the cart's handle, swaying slightly, was a keychain, a small laminated photo worn at the edges of a little girl with 2 braids and an enormous grin, holding up what appeared to be a hand-painted clay bowl. Owen stared at it. Marcus finished with the liner, straightened up, and noticed the boy watching him. He didn't startle. He just looked back, the way adults look at children when they aren't in a hurry, without agenda, without performance. "That's my daughter," Marcus said. Owen looked up at him. "How old is she?" 10 now. She was 7 in that picture." He reached over and steadied the keychain with one finger. "She made that bowl in an art class. Thought it was the greatest thing ever created." "Is it?" Marcus considered this with complete seriousness. "It's got a hole in the bottom, so it's not great for soup. But as art? Yeah, pretty outstanding." Owen almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. He took one step closer and looked at the photo again. "Do you always carry it?" "Every day." "Why?" Marcus unclipped the keychain from the card and held it out so the boy could see it more clearly. "Because some days are long," he said simply. "Helps to have something that reminds you why you're doing it." Owen looked at the photo for a long moment. Then he handed it back, and instead of walking away, he leaned against the wall beside the cart. Marcus didn't make anything of it. Didn't say, "Aren't you supposed to be somewhere, or does your mom know you're here?" He just clipped the keychain back onto the handle and moved to the next section of the hallway, and Owen moved with him, one slow step at a time. By the time Vanessa pushed open the conference room door, they had been talking for 20 minutes. She saw Owen first. His posture, which was different from the posture she had left him in. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor near the baseboard, his chin resting on one hand, listening to something the man in the gray uniform was saying. His face was open, attentive, alive in a way it hadn't been in months. She stood in the hallway and watched her son laugh at something. A short, quiet laugh, barely a sound, but real. She didn't move for a full 10 seconds. When she finally did, it was with the automatic instinct of a woman who had spent 2 years trying to protect a child she wasn't sure how to reach, and it came out wrong. "Owen!" Her voice came out sharper than she intended. Owen looked up. The openness in his face didn't disappear all at once. It drained slowly, the way color leaves something left too long in the sun. He unfolded himself from the floor and stood without being told twice. Vanessa crossed the distance between them quickly, her hand finding his shoulder, her eyes moving to Marcus. She didn't say anything hostile, she was too practiced for that. But the look she gave him was the look of a woman running a rapid, instinctive calculation. Who is this person? What was he saying? How long has my son been sitting on the floor of a maintenance corridor with a man I don't know? And the result of that calculation was visible in every line of her posture. Marcus didn't react to it. He took one small, deliberate step back, giving her the space she was clearly claiming, and set down the cloth he'd been holding. He didn't lower his eyes the way someone might if they felt guilty. He just waited. "I hope he wasn't bothering you," Vanessa said. The words were polite. The tone was a door closing. "Not at all," Marcus said. "He's a good kid." Something about the plainness of it stopped her, not the words themselves. She had heard people call Owen good before, usually as a euphemism for quiet or no trouble. But Marcus hadn't said it as a reassurance or a formality. He'd said it the way you state something you have simply observed to be true. He added quietly, "He's got a lot going on inside, just doesn't have somewhere to put it yet." Vanessa's grip on Owen's shoulder tightened slightly. She looked at the man in front of her, the worn uniform, the careful face, the keychain still swaying on the cart, and felt something she wasn't prepared to examine. The discomfort of being seen around a corner you didn't know someone was standing at. "Thank you for keeping an eye on him," she said, and steered Owen back toward the elevator. She didn't look back, but Owen did. It was brief, a single glance over his shoulder, back toward the corridor where Marcus was already returning to his cart, already resuming the work that had been interrupted. Owen didn't say anything. He didn't drag his feet or pull against her hand. He just looked, and in that look there was something Vanessa caught from the corner of her eye that she couldn't dismiss as quickly as she wanted to. It wasn't the look of a child reluctant to leave a distraction. It was the look of a child reluctant to leave a person. In the elevator, she asked Owen what they had talked about. He said, "Stuff," and looked at the floor numbers. She asked if the man had said anything that made him uncomfortable. Owen looked at her then, a long, flat look that was somehow more eloquent than anything he'd said in months. "He just talked to me, Mom," he said, and then the elevator opened and the moment closed. She replayed the hallway on the drive home, the way Owen had been sitting, the angle of his shoulders, relaxed, genuinely relaxed, in a way she had been trying to engineer with therapists and weekend plans and carefully chosen words for the better part of 2 years. It had taken a keychain and 20 minutes and a man whose name she didn't even know. What settled in her chest with the uncomfortable weight of something true was this. The problem wasn't that a stranger had reached Owen. The problem was that she finally had to admit how far away he had drifted from her, and that she had no idea how to swim that distance. 3 days after the hallway, Owen asked about the keychain at dinner. Not directly. He never did anything directly anymore. He asked whether Vanessa thought it was weird to carry a photo of someone everywhere you went. She said no, not necessarily. He pushed his fork through his rice and said that the man at her office did it. Said he carried a picture of his daughter because some days were long. Vanessa set down her glass. "You remembered that," she said. Owen shrugged in the way that meant, "Of course I did," and kept eating. Over the following week, it happened 3 more times. Owen mentioned Marcus. She had learned his name from the building's staff directory, in the offhand, slightly too casual way that children mention things they are actually thinking about constantly. He asked whether fixing things was something you had to go to school for, or whether you could just learn. He asked, out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning, whether old cartoons were better than new ones. and then said that Marcus thought they were. He asked whether Vanessa had ever been to the part of the city near the bus depot, because apparently that was where Marcus lived. Each time Vanessa answered, kept her voice neutral, her expression open. She was good at that. But something was accumulating underneath. She began watching Marcus more carefully when she was in the office. Not conspicuously, she was too controlled for that. But she noticed him. The way he moved through the floor without disrupting anything. The steady, uncomplaining rhythm of his afternoons. She watched him once stop beside a young intern who had dropped an entire stack of folders in the lobby and help pick them up without being asked, without making it into anything, just crouching down and gathering papers and handing them back. He was patient in a way that looked effortless. She knew from enough years managing people that it wasn't. The gratitude came first. It was genuine. She wasn't dishonest enough with herself to deny it. Something had shifted in Owen since that morning, a hairline fracture in the wall he'd built, and she was grateful for it. She would have been grateful to anyone. But gratitude wasn't the only thing. Underneath it, quieter and much less comfortable, was something she didn't immediately have a name for. It arrived as a small tightening in her chest when Owen mentioned Marcus at the dinner table. It sharpened, one afternoon, into a thought she recognized before she could stop it. My son talks to him more than he talks to me. And then the word for what she was feeling became unavoidable. She was jealous. Of a man who had spoken to her child for 20 minutes. The shame of that recognition was immediate and specific. She sat with it at her desk for a long time, turned it over, looked at it from different angles. She was not a petty person. She was not threatened by this man. She had no reason to be. And yet, the jealousy gave way to something worse, the questions it dragged in behind it. Not why does he respond to Marcus, but what does Marcus do that I don't? Not what is wrong with my son, but what have I been getting wrong? She had replayed Owen's sessions with his therapist, the weekend activities she'd organized, the conversations she had carefully initiated and watched collapse into silence. All of it, measured now against 20 minutes in a maintenance corridor. It didn't add up in her favor. She didn't know yet what to do with that accounting, but she couldn't pretend she hadn't run the numbers. The moment everything broke open happened on a Wednesday afternoon in the building's small kitchen on the 14th floor. Vanessa had not intended to bring Owen to the office a second time, but his after-school program had been canceled last minute. Her afternoon was unmovable, and the backup options had one by one fallen through. She told herself it would be fine, just a few hours. She was on a call when it started. Through the glass wall of her office, she could see Owen at the kitchen table with a juice box and his homework, and she could see the moment, 40 minutes in, when his pencil stopped moving and he just sat there, staring at the table with a blankness she had learned to read as a warning sign. She held up one finger to her assistant through the glass. 1 minute. The call ran 7 more. By the time she got to the kitchen, the homework was pushed aside and Owen's jaw was set in a way she recognized. Tight, controlled, the face of a child who had been swallowing something for too long. She sat down across from him and made her voice careful. You okay? Fine. You don't look fine. I said I'm fine, Mom. She knew she should let it rest. She knew that pushing never worked. But the week had been long and she was tired, and the distance between them had been pressing on her chest for months, and she said the thing she had been holding back without realizing she was holding it. I don't understand why you shut me out like this. I'm right here, Owen. I'm always right here, and you act like I'm not even in the room. The silence that followed was different from his usual silences. Owen set down his pencil very slowly. When he looked up at her, his eyes were full. Not spilling over, just full. The way a glass looks right before it does. You're always busy, he said. His voice was flat, but it cost him something. And when you're not busy, you're tired, and I don't... He stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. I don't know how to talk to you without feeling like I'm adding to it. Vanessa opened her mouth. And every time I think about Dad, Owen continued, and now his voice was fraying at the edges. Or about before. I don't say anything because I don't know if it'll make you sad or mad or... I just don't know. so I don't say anything. That's not me being mean, I just don't know what's okay to say. She hadn't heard him string that many sentences together in months. She sat there, stunned into silence, and for a terrible moment she had absolutely nothing to offer him. No reassurance, no right words, no practiced response. Just the sudden, shattering clarity of what she had missed. She didn't notice Marcus until he was already there. He had come in to restock the paper towels beneath the sink. Routine, the kind of task that brought him in and out of rooms 30 times a day without anyone registering it. He must have heard enough. He didn't announce himself or ask permission. He simply pulled out the chair beside Owen and sat down, unhurried, the way you sit beside someone when you're not planning on going anywhere. Owen looked at him. Something shifted. "You know what I used to tell my daughter," Marcus said quietly, "when she'd go real quiet on me for days at a time." He didn't wait for an answer. "I told her that sometimes feelings get too big for the door they're supposed to come out of, so they just stay inside and take up all the space. Doesn't mean they're bad feelings, just means they need a bigger door." Owen stared at him. "You've been carrying a lot," Marcus said. Not a question, just a recognition. And that was when Owen cried. Not dramatically, no heaving sobs, no outburst. He simply bent forward slightly, pressed the back of his hand to his mouth, and cried, the quiet, exhausted way that people cry when they've been holding on for a very long time, and something finally, carefully, lets them set it down. Vanessa sat across from her son and watched a man she barely knew give Owen the one thing she hadn't been able to: permission to not be okay. She didn't feel resentful. She felt the specific grief of a mother confronting the distance between her intentions and her impact, and understanding, for the first time, exactly how wide it was. The week after the kitchen, something changed in Owen. Not all at once, but there were small things. He asked Vanessa one evening what she'd been like as a kid. He left his bedroom door open while he did homework. He sat beside her on the couch without being invited. She noticed every single one. She also noticed around the same time that Marcus had started taking different routes through the 14th floor. She only caught it because she had begun paying attention to him in a way she hadn't before. He still did his job with the same quiet thoroughness, but where he had previously moved through the main corridor at regular intervals, he was now appearing less frequently in those spaces. When their paths crossed, he was polite and professional and gave nothing away. She might have thought nothing of it except that Owen noticed, too. She saw him glance toward the maintenance corridor one afternoon, the alert, searching look of someone expecting to find a person and finding an empty hallway instead. The source of the shift became clear on a Thursday when her deputy, Patricia, stopped by her office and closed the door behind her with the careful precision of someone delivering information they consider a courtesy. "I just want you to be aware," Patricia said, "that people have been talking about the janitor and Owen." Vanessa looked at her steadily. "Talking how?" "Some people are wondering if it's appropriate. A grown man, not related, spending time with your son." Patricia paused. "And there are some people saying that maybe he's been strategic about it, getting close to the boss's family." Vanessa held Patricia's gaze for a long moment without responding. "His name is Marcus," Vanessa said finally, "and he hasn't sought out anything. My son approached him." Patricia nodded and left, but the words were already in the room, and they didn't leave with her. Marcus had heard the talk before Vanessa did. It moved through the building the way those things always moved, not loudly, but thoroughly. A comment from one of the senior coordinators, a silence that lasted a beat too long when he entered the supply room. An email from the building manager asking him, without specific explanation, to limit his time on the executive floors to scheduled tasks only. He knew exactly what it was. He had been navigating versions of it his entire adult life. The scrutiny that followed him into rooms where his presence was considered, at best, circumstantial. He was a black man in a gray uniform in a building full of people who had decided, without deliberate cruelty and without any particular evidence, that his motives required monitoring. He wasn't surprised. He was tired in the specific way of someone who has never had the luxury of being surprised by this. So he made the practical calculation his situation required. He stepped back. He rerouted. He protected his job because his job was how Nia ate, how her school fees got paid, how the lights stayed on in their apartment. He told himself that Owen would be fine, that Vanessa was the boy's mother and she was clearly trying, that it wasn't his place and had never been his place, and he had simply let himself forget that for a few weeks. He told himself all of this with the disciplined conviction of a man who had learned to survive by being realistic. But there was a keychain on his cart, and every time it caught the light, he thought about a boy sitting cross-legged on a hallway floor, finally breathing. And that made it harder. Marcus submitted the transfer request on a Friday morning before anyone else arrived on the floor. He filled out the form, left it with the building manager's assistant, and went about his shift the same way he went about every shift, methodically, quietly, without drawing attention to the fact that something had just ended. He had requested reassignment to the lower floors, citing scheduling efficiency. It was a clean, uncomplicated reason that no one would look behind. He hadn't accounted for Owen finding out. Children had their own intelligence networks, overheard conversations, small observations cross-referenced with a precision that adults consistently underestimated. Whatever the mechanism, Owen knew by Monday. The change was immediate and severe. He didn't speak when he came home. He sat at dinner and moved food around his plate without eating. When Vanessa came to his room that evening and knocked and opened the door, she found him on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was the look of a child who has just confirmed something he had been afraid to believe. "He's leaving," Owen said without looking up. Vanessa sat down beside him. "He's moving to a different part of the building. He's leaving," Owen said again. Same tone, final. She didn't push back. There was nothing technically inaccurate about what he'd said. What followed were the worst 10 days since the divorce. Owen didn't withdraw gradually. He collapsed inward all at once, and the contrast with the small, careful progress of the weeks before made it worse, like watching something fragile get repaired and then broken again in the same place. He answered questions in single syllables. He stopped leaving his door open. The homework got done because Owen was the kind of child who did his homework regardless, but she'd find him at his desk an hour after he'd finished, still sitting there, doing nothing. His therapist noted a significant regression at their Thursday appointment. Vanessa drove home in silence, sat in the parking garage for a long time, and understood that she had run out of room to wait. It was Marcus's daughter who finally moved him. He hadn't told Nia any of it, or thought he hadn't. But Nia was 10, and she had her father's gift for noticing things that weren't being said. On Sunday morning, she climbed onto the kitchen counter to get the cereal down and said, without preamble, "Dad, you've been sad for like 2 weeks." Marcus looked at her. "Is it the kid from your work?" she said with the unself-conscious directness of a child who hasn't yet learned to make things complicated. He asked her how she knew about that. "You mentioned him once, and then you stopped." She poured her cereal. "You always get that face when you stop mentioning something." He asked her what face. She pointed at him. "That one." He sat down at the table and looked at his daughter, at the braids he'd done himself that morning, at the clay bowl confidence of her, at the 10 years of evidence that he had, in fact, known what he was doing all along. "You've been carrying a lot," he had told Owen. "Just means they need a bigger door." He had said it to a child and meant it completely, and had not once applied it to himself. He thought about a boy on a hallway floor, finally breathing. He thought about what it had cost that boy to breathe again, and what it was costing him now. He picked up his phone. Vanessa found Marcus on the 9th floor near the end of his shift on a Tuesday, 10 days after the transfer request had gone in, and Owen still wasn't right. She had thought about how to do this for days. She had composed and discarded several versions of what she wanted to say, run them through the same executive filter she applied to difficult conversations with board members and underperforming directors. She had prepared talking points. She threw all of it out in the elevator on the way down. He was restocking a supply closet near the stairwell when she rounded the corner. He saw her and straightened, his expression shifting into the polite neutrality she recognized as the face he wore for management. Respectful, unreadable, giving nothing. "Do you have a few minutes?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. He glanced at his cart. "Yes, ma'am." "Please don't call me that right now." He looked at her directly for the first time. She held it. "Owen hasn't spoken more than a few words a day since he found out you were leaving," she said. "He stopped eating well. He's regressing. That's what his therapist called it. Regressing." She paused. "I'm not telling you that to pressure you. I'm telling you because you should know the impact, and because I think you already suspected it. And I think that's part of why you made the call you made, to protect him and yourself from something that wasn't fair to either of you." Marcus didn't confirm or deny it. He waited. "I owe you an apology," Vanessa said. The words came out cleanly, without the stiffness she'd feared. "The way I reacted the first day, pulling Owen away from you, the look I gave you, that wasn't about anything you'd done. That was about me not understanding what I was seeing and defaulting to suspicion. That was wrong." She took a breath. "And what happened after? The talk in the building, Patricia coming to my office, I should have shut that down immediately and publicly. I didn't. That silence had consequences for you that you didn't deserve, and I'm sorry for that too." Something moved across Marcus's face. Not relief, exactly. More like the careful relaxation of a man who had been braced for impact and was cautiously registering that it hadn't come. "I know you weren't trying to insert yourself into our lives," Vanessa continued. "You were kind to my son because you recognized something in him, because you've lived something that taught you how to see it. My son doesn't need me to protect him from you. He needs me to understand why he trusts you, and to learn from it instead of resenting it." For a long moment, Marcus didn't say anything. Then, "He's not broken, you know." "I know. I just want to make sure you know, because sometimes parents of kids like him start to think the silence means something is fundamentally wrong with the child. It doesn't. It means the child decided that staying quiet was safer than being misunderstood. That decision made sense given what he'd seen. It's not permanent." "How do you know?" "Because Nia used to do the same thing," he said. "For about 2 years after her mother died, she almost stopped talking to me. Not because she didn't love me, because she was afraid that if she showed me how much she was hurting, it would hurt me too." He looked at her steadily. "Owen's not afraid of you. He's afraid for you. There's a difference." The hallway was very quiet. Vanessa pressed her fingers briefly against her mouth. She didn't cry, not yet, but the thing behind her eyes shifted, and she let it shift without trying to hold it still. "Tell me what to do," she said. "You're already doing it," Marcus said. "You came down here." It didn't happen all at once. That was the first thing Vanessa had to accept. She had spent 2 years looking for a turning point, a single conversation, a perfect moment, a door that would open and stay open. Marcus had gently dismantled that expectation in the stairwell corridor with a patience that suggested he'd had to dismantle it in himself once too. "It's not a switch," he told her on the second occasion they spoke. This time in the building's small cafeteria during his lunch break, with 2 coffees on the table and the deliberate formality of the first meeting replaced by something quieter and more functional. "You're not trying to fix something. You're trying to be somewhere consistently enough that he starts to believe you'll still be there when he turns around." Vanessa wrapped her hands around her cup. "I've been there." "You've been present," Marcus said. "That's not always the same thing. Being there means he can feel you even when nothing's being said." She took that home and sat with it. The first change she made was small and felt almost embarrassingly simple. She stopped filling silences with Owen. When he came home from school and dropped his bag in the hallway and didn't say anything, she stopped asking questions. She made something to eat and put it on the counter and went back to whatever she was doing and let the kitchen be a place where nothing was required of him. 3 days in, he sat at the counter while she cooked and said, unprompted, that his science teacher had mispronounced a word and the whole class had pretended not to notice. It was nothing. It was everything. She started leaving her office door open in the evenings instead of closing it when she took work calls home. She started saying things out loud that she would previously have processed in private. "I had a hard meeting today," or I've been thinking about your grandfather lately. Not as invitations, just as evidence that the interior of her life was accessible, that there was no careful curation happening, that he was not, had never been, a disruption to something more important. Marcus came back to the 14th floor 2 weeks after their conversation in the stairwell. Not in any formal or announced way. The transfer request had been quietly withdrawn, and that was the end of the administrative chapter. But his return mattered to Owen in ways that went beyond logistics. The boy didn't make a scene of it. He simply, one afternoon, walked over to where Marcus was working near the copy room and said hello, and Marcus said hello back. And they stood there for a few minutes talking about nothing in particular before Owen went back to the waiting area. That was all. That was enough. What Marcus gave Owen in those weeks wasn't instruction or intervention. He was simply a proof of concept. Evidence that a person could be steady, could be consistently present, could be trusted not to disappear when things got hard. He wasn't replacing anyone. He was demonstrating something that Owen needed to see demonstrated before he could believe it was possible. And watching it, Vanessa began to understand what she had been doing wrong. Not in the large architectural sense. She hadn't been negligent, hadn't been cruel, hadn't failed in any of the ways that would show up on any official measure of parenting. She had failed in a smaller and more insidious way. She had loved Owen at a distance that felt to him like love with conditions. Like love that required him to be manageable, to be okay, to not add weight to a woman who was already carrying a great deal. She had never intended any of that. She understood now that intentions weren't the point. The evening Owen finally said it out loud, sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, his voice very quiet, almost offhand. She was not prepared for it. "I used to be scared," he said, "that if I made you too sad, you'd leave too." Vanessa put down her glass. "I know you wouldn't," he added quickly. "I know that now. But I used to think it." She didn't perform composure. She didn't reach for something practiced or reassuring. She just got up, crossed the kitchen, and held her son, properly, with both arms, without the managed gentleness of someone trying not to overwhelm him, and for once in 2 years, he held her back. She cried. He let her. It wasn't a resolution in the way she had imagined resolutions. No music, no revelation, no door swinging open on a perfect scene. Just a mother and her son in a kitchen, finally in the same room in all the ways that mattered. Marcus got home that night at 7:30. Nia had already eaten. She was responsible about that when he worked late, heating up whatever he'd left in the refrigerator with the careful independence of a child who had grown up understanding that her father did a lot of things alone, and she could do some things alone too. He found her at the kitchen table with a library book, a glass of milk, and the focused expression she got when she was somewhere between concentrating and daydreaming. She looked up when he came in. "There's rice on the stove." "I see it." "I did my homework." "I figured." She went back to her book. He set his jacket over the chair and stood in the kitchen for a moment, not moving toward the stove, not checking his phone, not making the automatic inventory of things that still needed doing before tomorrow. He just stood there, in the quiet of a Wednesday evening, and let the day settle. He thought about Owen, about the boy's voice in the hallway the first afternoon, cautious and curious at once, the voice of a child who had learned to approach things carefully because things had a history of moving away. He thought about what Vanessa had said to him in the stairwell, the courage it had taken for a woman like her to come down 9 floors and say, "I was wrong," without softening it into something more manageable. He thought about the way Owen had walked over to him near the copy room and said hello, like it cost him something, and then stayed anyway. People found their way back to each other in small and unannounced moments. He had been watching it happen his entire adult life, with Nia, with himself, in the incremental and unglamorous process of keeping a family together through sheer, sustained presence. It didn't look like anything from the outside. It just looked like a man heating rice on a Tuesday, a boy saying hello near a copy room, a mother sitting down on a kitchen floor. He moved to the stove. Nia turned a page without looking up. "You seem better." "Do I?" "Yeah," she considered. "You seem like yourself again." He filled a bowl and sat down across from her and looked at his daughter. At the braids he'd done Sunday morning. At the library book she'd already renewed twice. At the milk mustache she was completely unaware of. And felt the fullness of a man who has spent years pouring himself into something and is only now beginning to understand that the pouring had not emptied him. It had shaped him. He had never given himself much room to acknowledge that. He had been the parent who handled things, the employee who showed up, the man who kept going because stopping wasn't an option. He had worn that identity so long and so completely that it had become invisible to him. Not a role, just a fact, like weather. He hadn't thought to look at it from the outside and recognize it as a choice he made every day, and a hard one, and one that deserved more than the silent continuance he'd given it. Nia looked up over the top of her book. "What?" "Nothing," he said, "just looking." She made a face and went back to reading. He ate his dinner. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary evening. Buses pulling away from stops, lights coming on in apartment windows, the low, continuous sound of people living their lives close together without quite touching. He didn't need it to be more than this. He had learned a long time ago that the moments that held the most weight were often the ones that looked from the outside like nothing at all. A man and his daughter in a warm kitchen. The ordinary, unwitnessed shape of a life being lived well. Some children aren't acting out. They aren't cold. They aren't difficult. They're just carrying something they don't have the words for yet, and they've learned, through enough small disappointments, to carry it alone. And sometimes the person who reaches them isn't the most powerful person in the room. It's the person who has already lived through the exact kind of loss that taught them how to sit with someone else's pain without trying to fix it, without judgment, without a timer running. Marcus Reed didn't save Owen. He just showed a boy that being heard was possible, and showed a mother what it actually looks like to be present. That's not a small thing. That's everything. We walk past people like Marcus every day, people whose lives have given them a kind of wisdom that doesn't show up on a resume, who do their work quietly and go home to their kids and never ask to be noticed. This story is a reminder to look again, because the people we overlook are sometimes the ones who see the most clearly. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because we'll keep telling stories about the people the world walks past without looking, every single week.